Imagine waking up in a peaceful English village, only to realize an entire family vanished, without a sound. No screams. No doors slamming. Just 6 people. Gone. Today, we're diving headfirst into the most chilling family disappearance you've never heard of, the twisted mystery of the Higgins family. What happened to them in 1965 will haunt you. It all started with silence. But not just any silence, unnatural silence. The birds didn't sing. The pub opened late. The wind, usually howling through the hedgerows, was dead still. Like the village itself was holding its breath. And then, the milkman noticed something. 4 bottles of milk, untouched. Not a single one taken inside. No footprints. No return bottles. Just frost creeping up the glass like a ghostly fingerprint. That was the first clue. By nightfall, a constable stepped inside the Higgins house, and everything looked normal. Too normal. Bed slept in, but unmade. A half-eaten casserole still warm on the counter. The radio, still whispering static. Knitting left mid-row. A crossword puzzle abandoned. And yet, the entire family had vanished. No signs of packing. No signs of struggle. No goodbye notes. Nothing. But here's where it gets really insane. In the hallway mirror, someone had drawn a spiral in the condensation. A crude spiral. Small, messy. Childlike. And it hadn't faded. It was like the house wanted someone to notice. And the town? The more they talked, the more they remembered. Weird comments. Strange rituals. The way the Higgins kid stared too long at shadows. Whispers about the cellar, a door that never opened. Was it a cult? A cover-up? Or something worse? You won't believe what was discovered next. Stay locked in. Because we're just getting started. Something was wrong. Not just the vanishing. Not just the silence. It was the signs. Symbols, odd, jagged runes, etched in frost and chalk near the Higgins doorstep. The way the kid stopped making eye contact. The cryptic sermons. Midnight lights flickering behind stained glass windows of the church no one used anymore. And before we take this story into full darkness, ask yourself this. Why are you still watching? Because this channel? It's not for everyone. This is for the fearless. For those who don't flinch when history gets monstrous. If you're still here, you know the truth. Some stories don't belong in textbooks. They belong buried, and we're the ones digging them up. So smash that subscribe, and tell me in the comments. Where in the UK are you watching from? Because this story? It might have happened in your backyard. And here's the twist. The Higgins mystery didn't start with a disappearance. It started with a village that looked the other way. Because the signs were always there. The truth? It began with a diary. Found hidden behind a loose floorboard in Lydia Higgins' room, 14 years old, curious, terrified. The cover? Green leather, cracked and faded. Her name inked inside next to a childish sketch of the family cottage. But the pages? They weren't innocent. At first, normal stuff. School. Her brother's tantrums. Complaints about the cold. But then, the tone shifted. Every entry closer to December 1965 got darker. Mom whispers to herself in the garden. She draws circles in the dirt. Just stands there. Doesn't move. Dad keeps the cellar locked. Says it's damp. But I hear voices. It's not the pipes. Then, 5 days before they vanished, Lydia wrote something that should have warned everyone. I asked Reverend Clark why we don't celebrate Christmas anymore. He said, some gifts come with a cost. Be thankful in silence. I don't like his eyes. And tucked deep between the final pages. A ripped piece of paper. A drawing. 6 stick figures, surrounding a giant spiral. One figure was upside down. Above them? A black sun. A symbol, unreadable. Unknowable. But it gets worse. On the back, scrawled in what looked like red pencil, shaky handwriting. Not Lydia's. It read. They chose US. The local constable said it was just the rambling of a scared teen. But one man wasn't so sure. And what he found next changes everything. Sergeant Len Henley smelled a lie. The diary, the spiral, the missing family, none of it added up. Because that spiral? He'd seen it before. Years ago. Scotland Yard. A training course on ancient symbols and criminal behavior. It wasn't just a scribble. It was a ward, twisted from ancient British folklore. Used in sacrificial rites. Meant to cleanse a community. Cleanse of what? And who were they cleansing? The deeper Henley dug into Ashworth, the harder the village pushed back. Doors stopped opening. The vicar vanished overnight, on sabbatical. And neighbors who once claimed the Higginses were like family suddenly muttered. Barely knew, fear. Guilt. Silence like a noose. And that's when Henley looked toward the one man who'd led them all. Reverend Malcolm Clark. You want a twist? This is where the darkness really begins. Ask anyone in Ashworth over 60 about Reverend Clark, and you'll watch their faces change. Voices drop. Eyes shift. Some walk away. But here's what we do know. Tall. Immaculately dressed. A gentle voice. But a smile that never reached his eyes. And almost never blinked. He came to Ashworth in 1940. No past. No clear origin. Clean papers. Vague references. Just appeared. To outsiders, he was just a country vicar. But beneath the sermons? Something rotten. He quoted obscure scripture. He preached about sacrifice, order, and removing rot from the garden of God. And for years? People just nodded. They didn't question. Until 1951. That's when everything changed. Attendance plummeted. Whole families left overnight. No goodbye. No forwarding address. Just gone. And Clark? He stopped using the Bible. Started reading from a black leather book, no title. No author. Just pages worn to the bone. When asked about it, he'd just smile and whisper. It's older than you know, purer truth. One woman, Agnes Barlow, now 91, tucked away in a Yorkshire care home. She remembered. 2 years before the Higginses vanished, she sat through a sermon. And what did he say? There is blood in the soil and birthright in bone. The village has gone soft. It's time to wake the stone beneath us. And everyone? They just. Saturday. There. No one moved. No one spoke. As if a spell had settled over the pews. But this wasn't just faith gone wrong. This was history rewritten with blood. And what Henley uncovered next will make everything you thought you knew about the Higgins family implode. They were nodding. Every single one. Agnes Barlow looked around that Sunday and thought, am I the only one who hears how mad this is? But no one stood. No one ever challenged Reverend Clark. Not out loud. And then there were the special services. Held 4 times a year. At night. By invitation only. Lights off. Doors locked. And through that thick, ancient wood. Chants. People heard them. They knew. But when questioned, even decades later, they'd just stare and say, some things are best left alone. Sergeant Henley wasn't having it. He drove straight to the vicarage. Pounded on the door. But it was empty. Not abandoned, cleansed. The study was stripped. The fireplace still glowed with the ashes of burned records. The chapel pews, overturned. And the altar? A perfect circle of ash. Clark was gone. Just like the Higgins family. But one thing remained. Carved into the inside of the chapel door, deep and ragged. The offering is complete. The gate will hold. And that's when the floor gave way, literally and figuratively. Because what Henley discovered next changed everything. Behind the altar, hidden behind old hymnals and false paneling, was a maintenance hatch. At first glance, it looked like storage. But behind it? A spiral staircase, narrow, steep, disappearing into darkness. Henley went down first. Dust everywhere. The air was wet and metallic. Sweet like rotting fruit, sharp like blood and rust. At the bottom, a door. Heavy. Oak. Reinforced. Claw marks on the inside, deep and violent. Someone had tried to get out. When they forced it open, what they found shouldn't exist. A chamber. Circular. Maybe 20 feet across. No lights, just pale beams slipping through ancient stone cracks. In the center, a blackened basin, scorched into the floor. It wasn't dried blood. It was history soaked in horror. The walls were covered in carvings. Eyes. Spirals. Open hands. Mouths stitched shut. And around the basin? Toys. Children's toys. A handmade doll. Worn leather shoes. A baby's bonnet, stained dark. A carved set of wooden teeth. And then, Henley froze. Turned pale. Backed out of the room. Because at the foot of that basin was a tiny patch of linen. Hand-sewn. 3 letters. L.H. Blue thread. Lydia Higgins. She'd been there. And this wasn't a disappearance. It was an offering. And the story is far from over. Lydia Higgins. That single patch, stitched with her initials, was just the beginning. When DNA results came back, they confirmed what Henley already feared. Some of those items belonged to the Higgins children. But that wasn't the most disturbing part. There were dozens of objects in that chamber. And not all of them belonged to the Higgins family. Suddenly, the local police were forced to reopen everything. Old case files, missing persons, forgotten names from dusty archives. And that's when a terrifying pattern snapped into focus. Ashworth had been losing people for decades. Runaways. Drifters. Vagrants. All dismissed. All forgotten. But every one of them had disappeared within a 2-mile radius of St. Mary's Church. The basement wasn't just some old cellar. It wasn't even in the town's architectural records. Even the diocese had no idea it existed. Why? Because it was older than the church itself. Experts said it might date back to pre-Christian times. A chalk cult site. Later repurposed, first by settlers, then by the church. But no one really knew its purpose. Until they found the ledger. It was hidden behind a bricked alcove in the wall, near the basin. Small. Rotten. And bound in human skin. Yes, confirmed through forensic analysis. The writing? Ancient. A language so obscure, even linguists couldn't fully translate it. But what they did manage to decode sent chills down Henley's spine. It listed names, dates, instructions, rituals, and one line that repeated again and again. We give, so the soil stays still. That's when this story exploded into something far worse. Because beneath Ashworth's quiet charm was a hidden society that had been feeding the dark for generations. Next stop, the Ashworth Historical Preservation Society. Sounds harmless, right? Flower shows. Bake sales. Heritage booklets. But Henley dug deeper. And found something disturbing. Not in what was recorded. But in what wasn't. There were no founding papers. No bank records before 1962. No official leadership. And yet, This harmless society owned over half the village. Manor homes, farms, shops, even St. Mary's Church itself. All listed under shadow corporations tied directly to the society. The members? The town doctor, the school headmistress, the local bank manager, and worst of all, Reginald Vaughan, the former chief constable, Henley's old boss. He'd quietly retired after refusing to investigate the Higgins case. Now Henley knew why. It was never neglect. It was allegiance. And right then, an anonymous envelope arrived on Henley's desk. Inside? The one thing that would break this wide open. Everything, evidence, transcripts, even images from the chamber beneath St. Mary's. Claire didn't hesitate. Within 2 days, a primetime expose aired titled, Ashworth, the Village That Eats Its Own. The reaction was immediate. Villagers protested. Officials panicked. And within 48 hours, 5 members of the Historical Society vanished without a trace. The school closed. The church was vandalized. And Sergeant Henley received an unmarked envelope. Inside, a single Polaroid of Claire, standing in front of the church door, time-stamped the night before. She never made it home. Henley rushed to St. Mary's, arriving just before dawn. The door was open. No sign of Claire. But on the altar sat her press badge, bent, scorched at the edge, smeared with what appeared to be blood. Police sealed the church. Local officials called the whole thing media hysteria. Blamed Claire's disappearance on mental stress. Henley wasn't buying it. Not when the church bell started ringing again, always at dawn, always 12 times. The same number of figures in the black and white photo. When he tried to speak publicly again, he was reassigned. Placed on indefinite medical leave for psychological exhaustion. Now, he lives in a cottage just outside the village. Keeps to himself. But he records everything. Because he knows this isn't over. And he's right. Every year on the same date, the anniversary of the Higgins family's disappearance, strangers come to Ashworth. Tourists, hikers, curious investigators. And every few years, one of them disappears. Next, we return to Lydia Higgins' diary. The final page. Torn, stained, but still legible. A warning. And a map. Loudspeaker, we uncovered a hidden chamber beneath a church, and what we found inside blew the case wide open. This isn't fiction. This isn't folklore. This is Ashworth, a real village with a real secret. And in 48 hours, a single article exposed everything. But first, let's rewind. Detective ## Sergeant Henley had proof. Photographs. Translated ledgers. Audio recordings of survivors who escaped Ashworth and never looked back. They talked about strange midnight gatherings. People disappearing. And a chilling code of silence, ask questions, disappear. And then came Claire. A fearless journalist. She took Henley's files, published the story in the Yorkshire Sentinel under the headline. Rolled up newspaper # The Rituals of Ashworth, did a village hide a century of sacrifice? Explosion symbol boom. It exploded. The media swarmed in. TV crews surrounded the church. Villagers, cracked. They started whispering names. People they'd always found off. Stories they'd never dared say out loud. Bullseye, but this is where everything turned dark. Henley's car? Smashed. His wife? Received a note. Whole # The roots are deep, and so is your grave. He was suspended. Removed from the case. But it was too late to bury it now. A national inquiry was launched. One by one, the people who'd once smiled on garden paths and baked pies for fairs, were dragged into the light. Fire, and then, the break. Microphone. A man in his 80s stepped forward. Edwin Marlowe, the village's retired undertaker. He confessed everything. He had been there. Face screaming in fear, he described it like a horror film. 1965, the Higgins family. Dressed in white. Led underground. Into the chamber. They were the offering. But here's the twist. It wasn't the first. And it wasn't the last. Every decade, he said, trembling. We gave them to the ground, or the ground would take us. Families. Orphans. Foundlings. Chosen. Approved. Sacrificed. And the scariest part? They believed it worked. Police cars revolving like the confession triggered arrests. The former chief constable. Reverend Clark. Doctors. Teachers. The people who ran Ashworth were now being hunted. Charges? Conspiracy. Ritual murder. Obstruction of justice. But just before trial, they started dying. Suicides. Natural deaths. Unexplained accidents. The key players were vanishing, like they'd been silenced by something older than the law. Megaphone, but Henley's mission wasn't in vain. He broke the silence. The press called it the Ashworth Pact. And now, for the first time in 100 years, the truth had a voice. But what if this wasn't just one village? What if this wasn't just one pact? Right, pointing magnifying glass up next, we dive into the origin of the cult, and uncover secrets buried before the village even existed. And trust me, Skull, it only gets darker from here. Don't look away. This is just the beginning. Police cars revolving light. What if your village was built on a blood pact? Police cars revolving light. This place looks ordinary, but beneath the rolling hills and cozy streets, a 1,000-year-old ritual was still alive. And what we found next? Straight up ancient horror movie stuff. Ashworth wasn't just any village. It sat right on the edge, not just between counties, but between worlds. Scroll before churches, before the crown, this was Iceworth. Its ancient name meant place of the ash sacrifice. And it was deadly accurate. We're talking druids. Sacrifices. Pagan rituals older than Rome. But here's the insane part. Torch beneath the church where the Higgins family vanished. Archaeologists discovered another chamber. Even older. Even darker. Carbon dated to over 1,000 years ago. At its heart, a blackened stone table, soot-covered from centuries of fire. Carvings of twisted trees, chained humans, bleeding roots. This wasn't a church. Whole hash, it was a temple. Open book hidden in a crumbling manor house nearby, investigators found documents. Written in early Middle English, that told the real story. Warning sign Ashworth was under a pact. A deal between the first settlers and a dark force beneath the soil. They called it the Keeper. Its promise? Ear of rice, protect the land. Skull in return? Sacrifices. At first, it was animals. But after the Black Death tore through England in the 1300s, electric light bulb, the rules changed. The land must drink that which thinks. Blood, from people. Strangers. Kin. Whoever the Keeper demanded. One line said it all. In blood of kin and stranger shall the soil know peace. Even as Christianity swept in. Skull, the rituals never stopped. They just went underground. They rebranded. Performing Arts, the Preservation Society? Just the newest name in a line of cults that stretched back 600 years. From 1437 to today, different names, same purpose. Fire, feed the soil. Hide the truth. Keep outsiders blind. And here's the part that shocked everyone. This wasn't just superstition. It was an institution. Baby, every generation trained the next. Births. Marriages. Even adoptions were arranged to protect the secret. Resist? You disappear. Henley, now suspended from duty but hailed as a media hero, got access to a sealed archive deep in the Royal Historical Society. And inside? Letters. Casual letters. From 1862. Lords and priests joking about that year's tithe. Ensuring that chosen didn't raise suspicion. Like they were talking about sending out invitations to a dinner party. That's when it hit. Ashworth wasn't corrupted. Warning sign # it was built for this. Its roots were always rotted, from the very start. And just when you thought it couldn't get darker, we went back to the Higgins family. And uncovered evidence that changed everything. They weren't just unlucky victims. Bullseye, they were chosen. Next, what was so special about the Higgins bloodline? And why did the society fear it more than anything? This isn't over, it's only getting deeper. And what's coming next might change what you think about every small town in Britain. Police cars revolving like they weren't just chosen. They were built. What starts as a family moving into a countryside cottage? Detective ## unravels into the most chilling conspiracy we've ever seen. Flashback to 1962. The Higginses move into a cozy little home. Looks normal, right? Wrong. House that cottage wasn't owned by the council. It was leased directly by Reverend Clark. For almost nothing. No public record. No standard rent. Just a signature and silence. But it gets way creepier. Edward Higgins? He got a job as church groundskeeper. Except, page facing up, the position was never posted. No listing. No ad. Just an offer, by name. Police cars revolving like, why him? That's when Sergeant Henley turned up a file that blew the case wide open. The two youngest Higgins children? Adopted. But not just adopted. File folder, their files were altered, redacted, scrubbed. Tracked back to a long-defunct Catholic orphanage in Sussex. And that's where the rabbit hole went deep. Rabbit explosion symbol. A retired administrator finally came forward. And what she revealed? Straight up dystopian. There was a list. An internal list with flagged villages like Ashworth, Hartmore, Granali. These weren't just quiet towns. Warning sign # they were preservation zones. And if you saw one of those names, it meant the child wasn't being placed for love or care. They were being sent for a purpose. A sacrificial purpose. The initiative was called selective placement. On paper, it looked generous. In reality? No entry sign. It was a covert delivery system. Delivering children with specific traits into villages that still followed the old ways. And suddenly, everything made sense. The Higgins family. Family, man, woman, girl, boy, blended group of adopted and biological children. Busts in silhouette, no extended relatives. Person with praying hands fully engaged in church life. Chart with downward trend, isolated. Obedient. Vulnerable. They weren't just ideal candidates for sacrifice. Skull, they were engineered for it. They were placed, built, molded. From the inside out, to be offered to the soil. Henley, now completely disillusioned, leaked an internal memo that read: the Higgins weren't random. They were designed, groomed, positioned. And once their usefulness was complete, erased. Pouting face, public outrage followed. Parliament launched immediate inquiries. Fire adoption records were cracked open across the UK. And from the shadows, survivors emerged. People from flagged villages. Sharing stories of locked late night prayer meetings. No entry sign, children who vanished. Churches with locked basements. # and families that never asked questions because they knew the price of curiosity. But this wasn't just corruption. This was systemic. Churches, government offices, adoption agencies, all working together, under the cloak of charity and faith, to feed communities built on ancient sacrifice. And just when it seemed like the worst was over, something changed in the Higgins family, right before they vanished. Chart with downward trend, their behavior shifted. broken heart their fear became visible. Even the society noticed. What did the Higginses find out? What secret was too big, even for the cult to hide? Next, the final days of the Higgins family, and the one recording that changed everything. You won't be able to look away. Police cars revolving like the Higgins family knew. And in their final days, the truth started leaking out in terrifying ways. This wasn't just a sacrifice. It was a countdown to annihilation. By August 1965, the village felt it. A dark cloud settling over the Higgins cottage. Neighbors said their smiles were gone. Their kids? Barely seen. Church attendance? Sporadic. Offbeat. Suspicious. Then came the moment that shook the town. Crying face 8-year-old Eliza was seen crying outside the church. Mrs. Cartwright, their neighbor, asked what was wrong. Her answer? Speaking head in silhouette, "They are coming for us. Daddy knows." And that's when things spiraled into total madness. Waxing crescent moon Edward Higgins was spotted digging in the churchyard. Late at night. Alone. Unearthing something. Then covering it fast. Fire 2 of the older boys? Seen burning the family photo albums in the garden. Why would they do that? Mary Higgins, once a bright community leader, now showed up with bruises, a vacant stare, and said nothing unless spoken to. Something was coming. And they knew it. But the most shocking discovery came years later. Inside a wooden toy chest. Left-pointing magnifying glass forensic teams uncovered a hidden journal, soaked by time but partially intact. Memo: the handwriting? Frenzied. Shaky. Desperate. And the entries? Pure dread. They lied. This was never about faith. The prayers are older than the Bible. Mary says we have to play along. But I see it in their eyes. They've chosen us. Eliza screams in her sleep. James sees a man in robes at the window. I told them it was a nightmare, but I've seen him too. And then, the chilling truth. It's not just the church. It's the schoolmaster. The baker. Even the constable. I trusted these people. These weren't just neighbors. They were the keepers. The watchers. The ones ensuring the ritual went on. But nothing compares to the final journal entry, written just 5 days before the Higgins vanished. They've warned us. The last offering failed. If we don't comply, it'll be worse. I asked Mary if she'd run. She shook her head and said, "It's already too late. I don't know what to do, but I buried the first one deep. Skull and crossbones # I buried the first one deep." That sentence haunted investigators for decades. And then, police cars revolving like police excavated the ground behind the church, right where neighbors saw Edward digging. What they found? A child skeleton. Female. Age, 3 or 4. Wrapped in cloth. But here's the terrifying twist. Warning sign # there were no missing children reported in Ashworth from that year. Which meant just one thing. This wasn't the first sacrifice. Not even close. It was part of a long, deliberate pattern. The Higgins family may have just been the latest in a century of offerings. And Edward's final act. A father trying to undo the unthinkable. Next, who was the child buried in the soil? And did Edward actually break the ritual, or doom the village forever? You won't believe what happens next. Calendar September 3, 1965. Ashworth's Harvest Vigil was supposed to be a cozy countryside tradition. Cider, hymns, oak trees, and stories of gratitude. But that year? Performing arts. It wasn't a festival, it was a funeral procession in disguise. The Higgins family arrived, together for the first time in months. And everyone noticed something was wrong. Mary wore a lifeless grey shawl. Her eyes? Sunken. Gone. Edward clutched 2 children at his sides, expression empty. The kids? dressed in identical white linen, barefoot, despite the cold. And not one of them said a word. The villagers, even the ones who never showed up, were all there. Because this wasn't just a community gathering. Skull and Crossbones hashed this was a ritual. As the sun vanished behind the trees, the Reverend stepped up. But this time, open book, it wasn't the Bible he opened. It was a black leather tome, worn, ancient, almost alive. Then, a voice. But not his. A language no one could place. Low, pulsing, rhythmic. Cyclone, then chanting. Candle hash, then humming. Speak off, then silence. A perfect, terrifying silence. A circle formed. The Higgins children stepped forward, like they'd been trained for it. No crying. No questions. Just obedience. Mary stayed still. Edward? He looked like he might say something, scream, even. But instead, he turned. Looked into the woods. Eyes a long, haunted stare. And then, darkness. The candles were snuffed out. That's where the official story ends. But we have a witness. Fearful face, a 14-year-old boy, Samuel Lorne. He had been dared by classmates to hide under the cider cart. He saw everything. And what he described. Skull, it will stick with you forever. Once the lights went out, the villagers resumed chanting, louder. Then came the bells. But not from the chapel. Multiple musical notes, these bells came from beneath the earth. Heavy. Metallic. Ancient. The kind of sound that rattles your bones. Through slits in the cider cart, Samuel watched in terror. The children, the Higgins children, were led in pairs. But not into the church. Open door around it. Past the gravestones. To the hidden root cellar, buried under ivy and stone. That was the entrance. Edward hesitated. Looked back. Mary never moved. Then he followed, and disappeared behind the church wall. That was the last time anyone saw the Higgins family alive. Sun with rays hash by morning, they were gone. No goodbyes. No trace. The village's official explanation? They moved away. But there were no records. No moving van. No forwarding address. No bodies. No ashes. Just emptiness. And the truth? Buried beneath generations of lies. But we're not done. Because what happened after that night would expose the final betrayal, the missing fifth child, and the fate of the keeper beneath the soil. Microphone hash, no forwarding address. No goodbye. Just gone. But one person never let it go. Boy Samuel Lorne, the boy under the cider cart, grew up haunted. He didn't forget what he saw. He documented everything. Maps. Sketches. Names. That terrifying word, the mouth. Packaged decades later, he passed that evidence to someone finally willing to listen. Police cars revolving light, Sergeant Graham Henley. 19 years on the force. Skeptic. No nonsense. He thought the Higgins story? Just a tragic cult case gone wrong. Until he opened Samuel's journal. Map hash, the drawings were rough, but accurate. And at the center of it all? An unmarked spot behind St. Mary's Church, labeled only as the mouth. Henley filed a request for excavation. No entry denied. The records were clear. No cellar. No crypt. No secret room. So, he went alone. Late October. One flashlight. One crowbar. And maybe, one prayer. Henley followed Samuel's map to the ivy-covered wall behind the church. And there? The ground sounded wrong. Hollow. He dug. 3 feet down, his crowbar clanged. There it was. A sealed stone door. Not natural. Not Christian. Cyclone, the carvings? Spirals. Eyes. A twisted sigil repeated over and over. Not a welcome sign. A warning. He broke the seal. Hole hash the air that escaped was dead. Old. Cold. Heavy. What he found wasn't a root cellar. It was a temple. Pedestrian, the stairs spiraled down 20 feet. The walls were bone dry, literally, tiny fragments embedded in wax. Dust floated like ash. At the center? Coffin hash, a circular stone table. Worn smooth. Stained black. Chained to the floor. Around it, burnt wax, rusted chains, seating for 30. This wasn't just a secret room. This was a place of sacrifice. Japanese dolls. Then Henley's flashlight caught something in the corner. A child's scorched doll. A tiny shoe. A photo of the Higgins family, folded into a perfect triangle. He collected it all. Back at the station, lab analysis hit hard. The doll and shoe? Eliza Higgins. Untouched for 25+ years. But then, under the stone altar, something else. Scroll pages. Torn from an old church register. Names. Dates. Ages. And next to some of those names? Skull and crossbones hash, a single mark. Up-pointing red triangle. Sergeant Graham Henley didn't sleep. He didn't even blink. Instead, he locked himself in the Ashworth Constabulary and pulled every single cold case going back to 1920. Card file box hash runaways. Card file box hash disappearances. Card file box hash dead-end files with one thing in common. No answers. But Henley had one more piece they never did. Scroll the ledger from beneath the altar. 60 names. All children. Many crossed out in red. He started cross-referencing. Tear off calendar, the earliest date, 1932. Tear off calendar, the most recent, September 3, 1965. The night the Higgins family vanished. Henley scoured. Memo parish death records. School rosters. Census rolls. Most of the names didn't exist. Erased like they'd never been born. But a few slipped through the cracks. Baby, a baptism entry here. A faded school photo there. Rolled up newspaper hash, a brief mention in a church newsletter. Then, gone. One case froze him. Clara Densor, 10. Last seen, 1948 Harvest Festival. Newspaper clipping read. Young Clara last spotted playing hide-and-seek by the church bell tower. Parents assumed she wandered into the woods. Search parties yielded nothing. The village mourns. Then Henley flipped back to the altar ledger. Large red circle, Clara Densor. Entry number 31. Circled. Just like Eliza Higgins. So he mapped every disappearance. Every festival. Every vigil. Bullseye, every 2 to 3 years, a child vanished. Always on a holy night. Always during a community gathering. Always explained away. But here's the part that broke him. No entry sign, no protests. No entry sign, no media outrage. No entry sign, no police escalation. In a world growing more connected every year. Nobody noticed. Or worse, they noticed and stayed quiet. So Henley went deeper. Books. He visited the Ashworth Historical Preservation Society. An innocent-looking archive, founded in 1909. Its job? Preserving local culture, folklore, genealogy. What he found? Maps of Ashworth marked in cyclone spirals. Large red circles. Crossmark XS through specific homes. Annotations in faded ink. Unfit bloodline. Broken line, monitor. Hollow vessels equals stronger call. Confirmed resonance, eligible. Failed, not taken. And then, one phrase repeated like a mantra. The pattern must hold. Skull. This wasn't random. This was organized harvesting. And Henley had just cracked its master ledger. Scroll inside the Ashworth Preservation Society, he found records of chosen children, not named, but tracked by lineage. Mentions of a secret order, the Wardens of the Root. House Higgins Family? Listed. Not a cult, a bureaucracy for generational sacrifice. This wasn't chaos. This was an institution. Hashtag briefcase and the Preservation Society? Not a historical club. It was the headquarters of the machine, embedded in the church. The council classical building the police car. For nearly a century. But now Henley wanted answers from someone who'd been there. So he drove 2 hours to find older man Reverend Malcolm Hargreaves, 86 years old. Synagogue former priest of Ashworth, 1940s-1971. Hospital living in a quiet church-run care home near Bristol. Henley expected denials. Maybe dementia. Maybe scripture-laced platitudes. Instead, the moment he whispered, Ashworth, the old man's face turned white. They sat in the empty chapel. Stained glass saints watched silently. Then the Reverend whispered. It was never called St. Mary's. They called it the Root House. Henley didn't speak. He let the old man confess. At first I thought they were just quaint rural folk with strange traditions. Old songs, robes, whispered tales about the pact. I humored them, I was young. Then came his first ceremony. He described it in vivid, shaking detail. A candlelit chamber beneath the church. Busts in silhouette, hooded figures forming a circle. A child at the center, called, blessed. Scroll hymns, chants, then silence. No blood. Not in front of him. But after the singing. The screams. They called it the offering of continuance. They believed the land beneath the village was alive. Ancient. Hungry. And it needed to be fed. If not, crops would fail. Illness would spread. The woods would awaken. So they gave it children. Quietly. Ritually. Regularly. Henley asked, voice low. Why didn't you stop it? The old man looked away. You can't fight the root. You can only delay it. I tried once. They burned my parish records. Threatened my sister. The next child was younger. Henley pressed. Did it stop after 1965? A long silence. Then. No. It just went deeper. Last time, Henley met the old priest. This time, he finds something worse. Not just a village cult. Not just Ashworth. This reached the upper floors of the nation. Film in the back of the Ashworth Preservation Society archive. Behind a dusty cabinet. Past the forgotten scrolls and moldy parish papers. He finds a ledger sealed with cracked wax and stained by time. Bound in cracked leather. Ink like dried blood. Inside. Names. Cyclone symbols. Generational markings. But near the center. Camera with flash, a photograph. Folded. Hidden. Henley unfolds it, careful, slow. And there they are. Busts in silhouette, a group of hooded men in robes. Fire holding unlit torches. Church standing before the root house. Candle a ceremony caught mid-silence. But in the center, something off. One man not in robes. Man in business suit levitating a formal black coat. Authority radiating from him. An outsider. But welcomed like a king. On the back of the photo, a handwritten note. Renewal ceremony, autumn equinox, 1951. With gratitude to Sir Edward M. Lon for services rendered. No entry. Henley froze. Sir Edward M. Lon wasn't just anybody. A knighted official. Classical building / member of the Home Office's Special Affairs Division. Card file box # access to files buried deeper than truth. Detective # no children. No wife. Retired. Died quietly. He wasn't from Ashworth. He brought legitimacy. Henley flipped through Lon's old records. Knighted in 1949. Retired in 1960. But had visited Ashworth 5 times before that. Henley finally understood. It wasn't just rural superstition. It was protected, encouraged, and occasionally used. Warning sign # Henley now suspected that the root, this ancient force beneath the land, wasn't just fed. It was partnered with. Sir Edward Lon died in 1972. But the whispers didn't. There were no scandals, just missing pages. Blackbarred files, phantom visits, special programs, erased after the war. Henley couldn't shake the feeling. Ashworth hadn't just been overlooked. It had been sponsored. Protected under the excuse of heritage. Quarantined in plain sight. Lon's presence proved it. The rot wasn't local. It was systemic. If a man like that came to feed the root, how many more places were feeding it too? Then Henley found it. Memo, a handwritten note stuffed into the back of the ledger. If the root is not fed, it feeds itself. The signs will return. The earth will open. Not a warning. A promise. If the sacrifices had stopped, maybe something worse was waking up. Bullseye, his next lead. A ruined farmhouse marked decades ago as unholy. Sealed by the society. Avoided by locals. Whispered about in one phrase. The containment failed. They called it the Blight House. Evergreen north of Ashworth, past dead hedges and broken stone. The land changed. Still. Wrong. The birds didn't sing. Even the wind felt cautious. The Renshaws once lived there. Old blood. Ancient ties. But in 1923, their land was salted. Erased. Henley went alone. The farmhouse was collapsing into itself. Slates shattered. Chimney strangled by vines. But the air. It pressed on him, like the ground was holding its breath. Inside. Skull and crossbones # animal bones everywhere. Dozens. Too many for a place abandoned a century ago. But worse were the symbols. Etched into walls. Scratched into beams. Burned beneath every window frame. The same runes found in the root house. The same ones circled in red. Warning sign # something had broken free here. Not in 1923. But long before that. They were painted in ochre, others carved so deep into the wood that splinters still jutted out. And in the basement? Something worse. A stone circle, scorched black with ash. At its center sat a cradle, wooden, old, still intact. Henley stopped cold. There were no records of children in the Renshaw family. None. But right here, beneath the farmhouse, was something undeniable, a ritual site, used more than once. The evidence was everywhere. Burned bone fragments embedded in the floor. Scraps of cloth charred to the texture of dried leaves. And beside the cradle? A rusted music box. It still worked. But when it played, it wailed. The lullaby echoed, slow and off-key, through the stone basement like a nursery rhyme from hell. And then Henley saw it, wedged deep into the foundation stones behind the cradle. A photograph. A child. Hooded figures. Dated, 1904. That was 60 years before the Higgins family ever vanished. Henley felt the realization hit like a wave of ice. The rituals hadn't started at the church. No, Ashworth's evil hadn't been erased. It had been remodeled. Repackaged in stone and stained glass. The root wasn't dead. It was relocated. And the cradle was empty. But the land felt hungry. Henley knew there was one person left who might know the truth. The last living thread connecting Ashworth to the original society, Iris Oley. She was 94 now. Completely blind since 1977. Tucked away in a private care home 12 miles from Ashworth. No visitors. No public record of interviews. Just a nephew who hadn't spoken to her in decades. But when Henley showed up holding that photo, the one with the hooded figures and the child, something cracked. She agreed to speak. Her voice was brittle, like frost breaking underfoot. But her memory? Razor sharp. They called it the offering, Inspector, she whispered. Every generation had to give one. Not just blood. Innocence. A child untouched by the world. Henley asked about the Higgins twins. Iris flinched. They were chosen before they were even born. And then she said something that made the room go cold. That family, the Higgins, they weren't parents. Not like you think. They were vessels. Groomed. Planted. Trained to look perfect, church-going, respectable, isolated. Henley understood. Ashworth didn't find sacrifices. It grew them. They were perfect. Church-going. Smiling. Isolated just enough to raise no questions. But the truth? The children weren't theirs. They were acquired. Some from local channels. Some from places no one dared ask about. Henley leaned in. What happened to the twins? Iris lowered her head. I delivered them. 2 boys. Healthy. A pause. A tremble. And then, they were taken below. By who? Henley demanded. She hesitated. Then, with a voice like cracking ice. The keepers. Always men. Always from Ashworth's oldest families. They kept the rights. The rules. They spoke to the root. And then she broke. A sob escaped, fragile and raw. We thought it kept the village safe. The storms passed us. The soil grew richer. The livestock thrived. For a time, it worked. Henley placed the old photo in her lap. The one from 1904. Hooded figures. A child. This boy, he asked. Who is he? Iris reached out with trembling fingers. Her touch paused on the child's face. A whisper escaped. That's my brother. Henley's pulse stopped. What? He was taken at the equinox. I was 6. My mother, she said he was born with the gift. She offered him herself. She wept the whole time. Silence. Dense. Heavy. Ashworth hadn't just buried its past. It had fed it. Generation after generation. The Higgins twins weren't the beginning. They were part of a harvest. And now, Henley had what he needed. A name. The keepers. And a location. A place more feared than the church or the farmhouse. Next stop, a sealed vault beneath Ashworth Town Hall. Once the society's private chamber, it was hidden for decades. Built in 1812, but resting on something far older. A 17th-century moot hall, used by the elders to write charters, settle disputes, and hold rituals. With Iris's final warning still rattling in his skull, Henley pulled dusty council blueprints. That's when he found it. An unmarked sublevel, sealed in 1966. Labeled only as structurally unsound. But the truth? It was never inspected. Never reopened. Just erased. Getting inside meant calling in a quiet favor from a council clerk whose grandfather had vanished after a society meeting in 1972. She said nothing. Just handed him a key. And a look that said, "Don't stay long." Henley entered Ashworth Town Hall. Past the records room. Behind a false wall. And there, hidden in shadow, was the entrance. A stairwell, cold and narrow, coiled beneath the building like a spine. The air changed. The scent of burnt wax, old stone, and something ancient choked every step. And at the bottom, Henley stepped into a room no one had entered in over 50 years. What he found carved into the walls would finally reveal what the root really was. And it would change everything. Henley had found the door. But nothing could have prepared him for what waited below Ashworth Town Hall. He stepped into a circular chamber, its brick walls crumbling, the air heavy with dust and something older. But it wasn't the decay that froze him in place. It was the carvings. Hundreds, thousands of sigils. Names. Dates. Etched into every inch of stone. They spiraled inward like a vortex, just like the runes he found beneath St. Mary's and the Wrenhaw farmhouse. But here, they merged. The spiral pulled everything toward the center. And at the core? One horrifying symbol. Not a word. A drawing. A twisted tree. Leafless. Its branches razor-sharp like claws. But the roots weren't roots. They were people. Children. Bodies tangled together. Faces turned upward in agony. This was the root. In the dead center of the room sat a raised stone plinth, scorched black with soot. Scratched. Worn by centuries of use. A brass plaque, still intact, burned with a single inscription. From ash through blood, from blood to bounty, from bounty back to ash. There were no lights. No electricity. But the air felt charged. Henley reached out. Touched the wall. Warm. The silence wasn't silence at all. There was a low hum, like the chamber itself was still breathing. Still waiting. He snapped photos, everything. The rooms. The spiral. The central tree. And then something clicked. One set of names kept repeating. Higgins. James. Higgins. Evelyn. Higgins. Daniel. Higgins. Matthew. Not just the parents. Not just the twins. For more. No records. No gravestones. Nothing. The Higgins family hadn't lost 2 children. They'd lost 6. This wasn't history. It was harvest. Next stop. Ashworth Cemetery. Where unmarked graves and disturbed earth told the real story of how far the Preservation Society had gone. Henley had enough evidence to arrest half the village council for obstruction of justice. But still, no one knew how many had been sacrificed, in the name of tradition. The records were lies. So now, the truth had to come from the ground. Ashworth Cemetery lay on the village's edge, choked by woods no one entered after dark. Not out of superstition. Out of fear. Not fear of the dead. Fear of who had been buried with them. Henley got his hands on an ancient 1931 plot map, faded and water-stained. It showed hundreds of grave markers. But when he compared it to the modern layout, 47 graves were just gone. Not moved. Not damaged. Erased. He tracked down the local groundskeeper. John Bell. 40 years on the job. Henley showed him the list. The old man's face changed instantly. He didn't deny it. He didn't lie. He just looked Henley in the eye. And asked one question. You sure you want to know what's under there? What Henley finds next will turn Ashworth's entire history into a lie. And it starts with the first exhumation. You really want to know? The old groundskeeper asked, and then he led Henley into the shadows. Far north in Ashworth Cemetery, where the ivy grew so thick it swallowed trees whole, the ground buckled, sunken in places like it had breathed in sorrow. That's the old W section, Bell muttered. Society burials. No headstones. Families were told to stay quiet, for the good of the village. Henley dropped to his knees. He brushed away leaves. Then dirt. And what he uncovered? A stone. Worn. Cracked. Just enough to make out the name. Higgins, Miriam. Born 1953. died 1957. Then another. Higgins, Ruth. Born and died in 1955. No birth certificates. No death records. Just scratched names, buried under decades of weeds and lies. Henley kept digging. One by one, the headstones surfaced, 5 more, all children. All Higgins. All dead. All born between 1948 and 1962. Some had full names. Some had none. One didn't even try to hide it. It read, "The Chosen." By sundown, Bell was gone. But not before leaving Henley with one final warning. The ground here remembers, and it doesn't like to be disturbed. That night, Henley sat in his car, hands shaking, a growing list in front of him. The public believed the Higgins family adopted 2 boys. The records showed 12. The cemetery? At least 8 were dead before the twins even arrived. This wasn't a tragic adoption story. This was a flesh farm. And the crops were children. But it didn't stop there. Back at his station, Henley laid out the photos. The runes. The spiral. The buried names. And then he cross-checked them with the society's old documents. The ones found beneath the town hall. The ones nobody wanted to translate. Suddenly, the pattern snapped into focus. In the back of an unlabeled file, bound in cracked black leather, Henley found it. A ledger. No title. No index. Just page after page of ritual accounting. Not of money. Of children. Each entry marked with a date. A code. A phrase in Latin or Old English. Henley flipped through pages. His pulse rising. Rude Moon, 2 taken, GHLF. Offering Higgins M. Barren Line. And then it hit him. Every April. Every October. The entries surged. Every top page was marked with the same twisted tree. The root. This wasn't random. This wasn't chaos. It was a system. A calendar of sacrifice. The next page held the date of the upcoming equinox. And beside it, a blank space, waiting for a name. The ritual wasn't ancient history. It was about to happen again. Henley wasn't done. The names in the ledger weren't just stories, they were real kids. He cross-referenced every initial. School rosters. Census data. Missing persons. Painstaking work. But by midnight? 16 names. Confirmed. 16 children who vanished from Ashworth between 1940 and 1975. Every disappearance had a reason. Fires. Illness. Families leaving town overnight. But now, the truth was inked in ancient Latin. They weren't lost. They were offerings. And then Henley read the line that shattered him. Harvest 1965. Full yield achieved. The Higgins seed has taken. It wasn't a record. It was a ritual log. Each child assigned a value based on bloodline, age, purity. Words like unspoiled, second-born, unbaptized, scribbled beside their names like commodities. One symbol, a small I, kept appearing. Henley traced it. Those were labeled watchers. Sensitive to the veil. Children who saw too much. This wasn't murder. This was an economy. A spiritual black market. And worst of all? The ledger didn't end in 1965. The last full entry? 1984. 19 years after the Higgins twins were taken. Even after the supposed collapse of the Preservation Society. The rituals continued. Just more quietly, Henley whispered. More carefully. More selectively. At the back of the ledger, one final note. Scrawled, jagged, like it was written in panic. When the bough breaks, the root will return. Watch the twin moons. Henley hand-copied every page. Later, the original ledger would mysteriously vanish, lost in a department reshuffle. But it didn't matter. Henley had seen too much. Ashworth wasn't unique. It was the seed bed. The nursery of the root. And the children? Not victims. Investments. Henley had the proof. It was time to burn this system down. He returned to Ashworth with a case folder that could start a war, names, dates, grave sites, ledger entries. But the village? It didn't blink. Because in Ashworth, truth isn't buried. It's guarded. It was a rainy Thursday evening in September when Henley knocked on the door of Eleanor Voss. She was once the society's secretary. Now, in her 90s. A gentle face. A floral gown. The picture of innocence. She opened the door without fear. No confusion. No hesitation. "I was wondering when you'd come," she said calmly. As if this was all predestined. Inside? Doilies. Framed photos. A neat little parlor. But beneath the surface, something far darker waited. Henley stepped into the cottage thinking this was just another old woman with old secrets. But when he mentioned the ledger, her smile didn't fade, it sharpened. Eleanor Voss didn't tremble. She leaned in, her voice calm, unwavering. "You misunderstand," she said. "The root isn't evil. It's balance. Sacrifice. The children were chosen long before we ever touched them." Henley froze. She wasn't denying it. She was explaining it. "We didn't take them," she said, tilting her head. "We returned them, to where we all come from." Henley's mind raced. This wasn't confession. It was doctrine. "Ask yourself," she whispered, "why do you think no war ever touched this village? Why no plague lingered here? We gave, so others could live." Henley looked around, trying to process what he was hearing. That's when he noticed the sculpture on her mantel. Half human. Half tree. Arms like branches. Beneath it, carved into the wood, "He who roots rules over the knee." It didn't stop there. Over the next 2 days, Henley confronted 5 more elders. Each one gave the same response. Cold. Rehearsed. Detached. Would you rather starve in darkness, or thrive in bloodlight? None denied the ledger. None denied the children. They didn't see it as murder. They saw it as a necessary trade. But the moment Henley tried to take it higher, everything began to crumble. His superiors delayed him. Emails vanished. Files went missing. Whispers began swirling about his mental health, his so-called obsession, his vendetta against Ashworth. Someone, somewhere higher up, was burying the truth. That's when Henley found the second set of burial records. Not just Ashworth, 3 other villages. Same signs. Same deaths. Same society. Ashworth was never the end. It was just the first. And then the threat became personal. 3 nights after leaving Ashworth, Henley returned home. The door was open. He lived alone. No one had a key. Inside? Nothing was stolen. Nothing broken. Everything in place, except one thing. On the kitchen table sat a single, chilling message. A slip of paper. A child's tooth. An iron key. 6 words, carved with something sharp. The root remembers who forgets. The key had 1 word etched into the handle, Higgins. Henley knew what it meant. The deepest part of the Higgins estate, the one sealed after the investigation, was never truly closed. And whatever was locked behind that door wasn't sleeping. Henley walked into his home thinking it was just another night. But what he found waiting on his kitchen table would change everything. A small wooden box. Handmade. No label. No sound. No fingerprints. Just the low hum of the fridge and the rain tapping on the windows. Something about it felt wrong. He opened it. Inside, a blackened clump of ash, bone fragments, crushed, and a photo. A photo of the Higgins children, sitting on the church steps in their Sunday best. Smiling. But scrawled in red ink across their faces. "You've seen too much. Let the root rest." And beneath that, in Latin, ad radicem redent omnia. All things return to the root. Henley staggered back, not in fear, but in fury. They had broken into his home, not to kill him, but to remind him. They were still out there. Still powerful. Still untouchable. But that ash, he recognized it. During the original investigation, Henley had sealed off a chamber under St. Mary's Church, the subbase, where the last of the Higgins possessions were found. That chamber had been classified, locked, off-limits. And yet, the ash in that box was identical to what they found inside the sacrificial circle beneath the altar. Someone had returned to that room. And someone had used it again. Henley didn't hesitate. He drove straight to Ashworth. The church was locked. Silent. Dark. But as he crept along the eastern wall, the one where claw marks had once been hidden behind the choir stalls, he saw it. Fresh soil. Not just disturbed. Turned. Someone had dug under the foundation, then covered it back up. Henley marked the spot. Took photos. Called forensics. They arrived before dawn. What they uncovered? No one was ready. A new ritual circle. Not ancient. Not historic. Recent. At the center. A burned rag doll. Iron nails through its limbs. And surrounding it, teeth. Small. Human. Child-sized. Henley knew now, the warning wasn't to scare him. It was to show him. The rituals had started again. This wasn't about the past anymore. This was about keeping the root alive. And then the call came. 3:17 a.m. Henley was buried in reports, exhausted, unraveling. His coffee was cold. His will, nearly broken. An unlisted number rang. He answered. A voice whispered. I wasn't supposed to survive. But I did. She claimed to be a survivor. One of the ones meant to die with the Higgins children. And what she knew would blow the entire case wide open. Explosion symbol, this is it. The phone rings. 3:17 a.m. Henley answers, expecting another dead end. But instead, a voice. Shaky, but deliberate. You don't know me, but I think you've been looking for me. Henley froze. I was one of the Higgins children, sort of. My name isn't on any record. They never officially adopted me. Henley leaned in. The voice was real. Nervous. Raw. She said her name was Lydia May Caro, and what she was about to reveal would blow the investigation wide open. Spring, 1965. Lydia was 8. No files, no agency. Just dropped into the Higgins home like a stray memory. A trial stay, arranged through a friend of the church. No questions. No paperwork. Henley's heart nearly stopped. He'd seen her name, once, in the second ledger, under a strange category. Non-initiate. A code no one had ever cracked. Lydia continued. They never meant to keep me. Helen Higgins said my spirit was blocked, that I couldn't hear the root. And then Henley asked the question that burned in his chest. How did you escape? Her voice dropped. I saw what they did to Peter, one of the real ones. What happened next? Unthinkable. They called it a cleansing. They brought Peter to that room, beneath the church, and made the others watch. No screams. Just silence. Peter smiled. Like he wanted it. And that's when Lydia ran. No shoes. No direction. Just raw terror. Through the fields. Onto the motorway. A truck driver spotted her, covered in cuts and mud. She told the police it was abuse. Left out the rituals. The symbols. The smile. They put her into foster care far from Ashworth. But she never forgot. Not the chanting. Not the symbols. Not Helen's eyes. Henley was stunned. Everything Lydia said aligned with the society's darkest secrets. The doctrine. The rituals. The control. And before she hung up, she said one last thing. The line that shattered Henley. They let me go. I wasn't just a failed offering. I was meant to live. To remember. Henley's stomach turned. What if Lydia wasn't a mistake? What if her survival was part of the ritual? Bullseye. The next day, they met. A secret cafe. Foggy coastal town. Whitby. Remote. Forgotten. Chosen for its silence. Henley arrived early. But Lydia was already there. Hidden in a corner booth, coat pulled tight, dark glasses on. She looked older than he expected. But what she brought with her? A drawing. One she made as a child. Of what she saw beneath that church. And what's in it? Would destroy everything Henley thought he understood. Police cars revolving like breaking point. Lydia Caro looked older than her years, not from age, but from knowing too much for too long. 60 years of silence. One envelope. And what was inside? Fire would change everything. She slid it across the table like it weighed 1,000 pounds. I've kept this hidden for 60 years. It's the only proof I have. But if you're not ready to see what they really were, put it back. Henley opened it. Inside, a child's drawing. Crumpled. Faded. Done in crayon and colored pencil. But this wasn't scribbles and butterflies. It was a map of madness. Bullseye. A circular stone chamber, identical to the one under St. Mary's Church. Henley had stood in that room. But this version? Covered in figures in robes, towering and silent, faces hidden behind twisted masks, some animal, some barely human. In the center, a platform. A child, arms spread wide, laid out like an offering. But what hovered above that child? That's where Henley's blood ran cold. A root system. Not like a tree. Like veins. Pulsing. Wrong. Alive. And at its base, a face. Sunken eyes. Gaping mouth. Drawn in thick black. Like something whispered into a child's ear during a nightmare. Beneath it, in shaky handwriting. He lives under the church. He eats what we give him. Henley couldn't breathe. I drew that the night I escaped, Lydia whispered. I don't know if it was a dream, or a memory. And then she told him the part that shattered everything. Helen Higgins used to say we weren't adopted. We were chosen. She said our souls were food. Not for God. Not for the devil. But for something older, something buried. They called it the root beneath. And every few years, it needed to feed. Skull. This wasn't just cult behavior. It was a dark theology. A belief system. A religion built on sacrifice. Henley realized this wasn't isolated madness. It was ancient, normalized, and deeply embedded in the community. He asked the only question left. Was there anyone else like you? Anyone who got away? Lydia shook her head. They only let me go. And now? I think it's starting again. She wasn't wrong. Because what Henley didn't know yet, what was happening right then, was this. Round Pushpin Elm Rook. A village just 30 miles from Ashworth. A new report landed on his desk. A missing child. Isa Fennick. Age 7. Vanished. Middle of the night. No signs of forced entry. No ransom. No digital trail. Just gone. And the kicker? Her family had deep ties to the original society. Face screaming in fear. What Henley just uncovered wasn't history. It was the prologue. And now? The ritual had begun again. If Henley hadn't seen it with his own eyes, he never would have believed it. Another missing child. Another grieving family. But this time, it wasn't just a case. Fire, it was a message. On Isa Fenwick's pillow lay a single white root. Dirt still clinging to it. Tied around it, a red thread, knotted into a symbol older than language. Henley's heart dropped. He knew that symbol. It was carved into the ritual chamber beneath St. Mary's. Drawn in Lydia's childhood nightmare. Etched into every society ledger. It always appeared beside one phrase. Return it to the earth. That wasn't grief. That was doctrine. Henley raced to Elmrook. The local police were more ceremonial than functional. But Henley needed access to the Fenwick home. Open door, and what he found inside. Too perfect. Too pristine. The house felt less like a family home. And more like a stage set. Every item in its place. No signs of panic. No photos disturbed. And the parents? Too calm. Thomas sat silently. Abigail spoke softly, almost rehearsed. She's gone to be with the root, she whispered, without even realizing it. Henley froze. What did you say? She blinked. Confused. I didn't say anything. But she had. And when Henley ran her name. Abigail Fenwick was actually née Ashcroft. The Ashcroft name appeared twice in the 1960 Ashworth census. They were supposed to be uninvolved. Innocent. But now? Skull, they were legacy. Henley's blood ran ice cold. The society hadn't vanished. It had scattered. Like spores. Migrating into new villages. New names. New masks. Evergreen, and now, they were waking up again. Henley drove to the edge of Elmrook. Questioned neighbors. Asked what they'd seen. One old man, a retired teacher, said something chilling. Every Sunday, I'd see that little girl walk the edge of the woods, barefoot. Even in winter. Her mother said it was good for the soil. But there was more. They started meeting at the old mill last month. Called it prayer. But I never saw a Bible. Bullseye, this wasn't a copycat. This was a continuation. Next stop. The abandoned Elmrook mill. Henley would break in alone, at night, risking everything. And what he'd uncover inside would be the clearest connection yet, a twisted altar. And a name carved in stone that ties Elmrook directly back to Ashworth. What name was it? What did they build in the shadows? You won't believe what Henley found next. In the dead of night, he entered Elmrook Mill, a forgotten relic swallowed by moss and fog. But inside? Something ancient was still very much alive. The windows were boarded. The front door chained. But a side window had fresh scuff marks, someone had already been inside. Henley climbed through, landing on rotting timber in what used to be a grain room. The air hit him like a fist, thick, metallic, damp. Not death. Not decay. Something older. It smelled like wet earth and blood. His torch barely pierced the darkness. But then, he found it. A chamber. Cleared. Prepared. Used. In the center, a crude altar. Stone. Scorched wood. Arranged with purpose. Bundles of dried herbs. Feathers. Wax-sealed jars. And bones. Small ones. Not random. Laid out in circles. Henley's hands trembled. And then, carved deep into the stone wall behind the altar. A single word, Ashworth. This wasn't mimicry. This was inheritance. They weren't copying the past. They were living it. Camera with flash, Henley photographed everything. Every bone, every mark, every symbol. He scraped dirt from the altar base. Pocketed a dried bundle. Whole, but before he left, something caught his eye. Carved into the floorboards, hidden near the shadows. Feed the root. Free the child. The same phrase Lydia Caro had whispered. The belief that sacrifice was salvation. Not cruelty, liberation. Henley stepped out into the cold night with two realizations. 1. Elmrook wasn't just involved. It was built on this. A village of descendants still practicing a cult's doctrine, wrapped in the disguise of normal life. 2. 3. Isa Fenwick wasn't the first. Just the first the world noticed. 4. Baby, but there was one woman in town who might have seen the truth from the beginning. Next. Henley confronts a retired midwife, long dismissed as senile. But she kept a private birth ledger no one had ever read. What she reveals. Some children never existed on paper. No certificates. No footprints. No records. They were born, only to be given. To the root. The morning after his visit with Mabel Dorr, Henley compiled everything. Photos from the Elmrook mill. Lydia Caro's drawing and testimony. The Red X ledger of vanished infants. And direct family links tying the Fenwicks, Ashcrofts, and Caros to the Ashworth Society. He sent it to the Regional Missing Persons Unit, the Child Safeguarding Board, even a contact in counter-terror intelligence. He didn't just want action, he needed backup. But what came back? Silence. Or worse, deflection. A response from the local Elmrook constable's office read: "We see no compelling evidence of criminal activity. The child in question may be a runaway. Community is cooperating fully." Henley couldn't believe it. Then came the call, from his own superior. "You're overreaching. You've been warned before about obsession with legacy cases. This isn't your jurisdiction." His blood boiled. They weren't just ignoring him. They were protecting someone. Open file folder, he checked the digital access logs on the police network. Someone had reviewed his files. Then redacted them. His original report was now marked inconclusive. Closed pending new evidence. Henley stared at the screen. They weren't just turning a blind eye. They were shielding the cult. Whether through ignorance, fear, or something worse, the system itself had been infiltrated, or groomed to stay quiet. But he wasn't backing down. There was one lead left. Round pushpin in the margins of Mabel's ledger, a name had been scrawled repeatedly. Reverend Colin Harrow. Not from Elmrook, from a neighboring village called Dunlow. Mabel had written. Brought the anointing root. Preached return to the root beneath. He promised peace through offering. Henley didn't know what Harrow's role was yet, priest, prophet, or puppet. But if he could trace the spiritual lineage, he could prove this cult wasn't folklore. It was strategy. Next. Henley tracks down Reverend Harrow, a once defrocked clergyman whose sermons were banned in the 1970s for preaching rituals of the soil. But Harrow? He's still alive. Still preaching. And he has one final congregation. Underground. Waiting. Feeding the root. Henley came back to London like a man with dynamite in his hands. He had it all, the midwife's secret ledger, photos from inside the abandoned mill, and weeks of obsessive notes connecting Elmrook to the Ashworth cult. He thought this was it. The moment everything would blow open. He was wrong. He filed an official report with the Regional Child Protection Unit. Marked it urgent. He included evidence of ritual abuse, unregistered births, even suspected child sacrifice. And then, nothing. Days passed. Not a single reply. So he picked up the phone. Called directly. After being transferred, put on hold, stonewalled, someone finally spoke. The voice on the line didn't hesitate. "You're not a current officer, Mr. Henley. You're acting independently. Your evidence is circumstantial and unverifiable." It wasn't just a rejection. It was a shut door. Henley didn't quit. He sent everything, documents, timelines, even DNA test requests, to old friends still inside the Met. A few answered, cautiously. Some even promised to dig into it. But within 72 hours, every one of them ghosted him. And then the letters started. Thick envelopes, official-looking, stamped from a solicitor's office in Cambridge. Legal threats. Accusations of harassment. Warnings that he was defaming innocent local families. One line chilled him. "You are in violation of protections extended to heritage members of Elmrook." Heritage members? Henley said it aloud, stunned. What the hell does that mean? So he did what he always did, he went digging. Public records. Trust filings. Obscure tax documents. That's when he found it. The Historical Preservation Society, active in Elmrook since 1947. Officially, just a non-profit focused on rural customs. Unofficially? Its current chair was Dr. Rupert Fenwick, the exact name that appeared twice in Mabel Dawes' hidden birth ledger from the 1970s. But that wasn't the worst part. 3 current members of Parliament had accepted campaign donations from this group. A retired regional judge, who'd dismissed multiple missing persons cases over the decades, was listed as an honorary patron. And then Henley saw the grants. Government issued. Signed off. For what? To preserve the cultural integrity of Elmrook's traditional rights. They weren't just hiding this. They were funding it. This wasn't incompetence. This wasn't oversight. It was design. Someone, somewhere, with real influence, was protecting the society. Actively. Henley finally understood, the silence he'd been fighting wasn't just resistance. It was infrastructure. A wall built high and deep, designed to keep the truth buried. And underneath that wall? The roots still lived. Henley had uncovered a horrifying truth: the Ashworth cult wasn't dead. It had evolved. Rebranded. Hidden itself inside government grants and folklore festivals. It didn't just survive. It thrived. Child sacrifice had been twisted into heritage. Blood rituals wrapped in bureaucracy. And the worst part? The state was funding it. That night, Henley wrote in his notebook, his hands shaking. "I can't fight this alone, not after EA, not after the children marked with red XS." But help was coming. Enter Mara Gibbons. A fearless, underground journalist. A documentarian known for hunting the darkest institutions alive. Her series, Rot at the Root, had exposed corrupt priests, rogue sects, and vanished orphans. Henley reached out. And she answered. They met in a quiet pub near Oxford. Henley laid out everything: Mabel's hidden ledger, the cult symbols, the donation records, the mill, the tunnels under St. Mary's. He expected disbelief. Instead, Mara stared him down and said, "You're not paranoid. You've uncovered a machine. Generational. Protected. Hidden in plain sight." Then she dropped the bomb. "We're not exposing them from the outside. We're going in." Boom. Plot twist. The cult, now calling itself a Historical Preservation Society, was about to host its biggest private event of the year. A night of rural folklore. Invitation only. Held deep inside a gated forest estate near Elmrook. But Mara had already hacked the system. She held up 2 forged passes, gifted by a former society insider who'd gone dark years ago. Her cover? "They think I'm a folklore filmmaker from Devon. They want exposure on their terms. Let's give them exposure on ours." Henley hesitated. He'd seen what these people could do. But this was it, the opening he'd needed for months. The mission was on. They trained like spies. Hidden microphones stitched into their collars. Micro cameras disguised as vintage brooches. Backup recorders hidden in the heels of Mara's boots. Their cover story? She was a documentary filmmaker. He was her assistant, a retired archivist obsessed with regional myth. Their objective? Capture everything. Blow the society wide open. Expose the rot that had rooted itself into the bones of Elmrook. They had one shot. one night. No second chances. The invitation said, a celebration of forgotten English traditions for the BBC. But the date? October's 3rd Saturday, the exact moon cycle from the midwife's secret ledger. This wasn't random. Henley and Mara arrived just before dusk. A man in a long black coat met them at the gate, clipboard in hand, sharp eyes, and stitched over his chest, an eye in a tree, strangled by barbed vines. Welcome to the Ashworth Society's private gathering. The estate was buried deep in the forest. Ancient, isolated. Lanterns lined a gravel path, casting eerie shadows that flickered like they were alive. Guests moved in silent pairs. Formal. Pale. Way too calm. Young and old, but all looked like they knew something no one should. Inside the main hall, everything screamed ritual. Woodcut tapestries. Cracked banners. The smell of old paper and burnt herbs. And in the center, cloaked figures, chanting in Old Brythonic. Only it wasn't just a reenactment. The blood on the altar? Fresh. And the language? Real. What came next, no one was ready for. At first, Mara and Henley thought it was theatre. A folk ceremony for the cameras. But what they filmed was something ancient waking up. The air inside thickened, not just from incense and wax, but from something else. Something alive. Their hidden cameras rolled as the society's ritual escalated fast. A circle was etched into the floor, ash and salt forming strange runes. Above it, dozens of animal skulls suspended from the ceiling, goat, deer, fox, their tiny horns tied with bells that chimed as the room breathed. Then, total silence. A door creaked. 2 hooded members entered, dragging a girl. She was maybe 14. Dazed. Barefoot. Drugged. Her wrists bound in red cord. Her dress white, cinched with dried thorns. She looked like a sacrifice from a fairy tale, but this was no story. Henley's chest seized. He took a step, ready to stop it. But Mara grabbed his arm and hissed. Not yet. If we break cover, this footage dies with us. He froze. Barely. A third figure entered. Taller. Older. Wearing a wooden deer mask. The moment he stepped onto the slab, the room began to hum. Chanting started again. Not loud. Not angry. But soft, like a lullaby no human should remember. Words that didn't come from any schoolbook. Words that felt older than the trees outside. Then, he raised a curved blade. The masked figure raised the blade. Its curved edge gleamed under candlelight like it was thirsty. He touched the girl's forehead with the tip. Blood. Just a thin line. She didn't move. Didn't blink. It was like she wasn't there anymore. Around them, the society began to sway. Not in chaos. In unity. Some hummed, some whispered, but all were locked into the rhythm of something ancient. Not religion. Programming. This was not performance. This was ritual. And it was about to go too far. The masked leader reached into a blackened bowl, a mix of wet ash, soil, and something else. He smeared it across the girl's chest and cheeks like it was sacred paint. The chanting peaked. Henley leaned in. This is the initiation. Mara nodded, locked in. They are marking her. Like the ledgers. It's the blessed womb ritual. But then she added something that made Henley's heart stop. She's not pregnant, yet. They are preparing her to be. His blood turned to ice. The blade moved again. Down to her navel. Just as it touched skin. The lights flickered. A surge. Half the candles blew out. The spell shattered. Chants stuttered. Heads snapped around. And for a split second, chaos. Mara grabbed Henley's arm so hard it left marks. Now. We leave. Now. They didn't run. They vanished. Through a side door, into the night. But this wasn't over. Because what they found next changed everything. Hidden beneath moonlight and mist, Henley and Mara fled into the woods, the sound of the ritual still echoing behind them like a forgotten hymn chasing through trees. No words. Just the beat of their boots, the snapping of branches, and the feeling that the forest was watching. Then Henley stopped, one hand on a tree to catch his breath. We saw enough. That girl, they are still doing it. But Mara wasn't listening. She was staring ahead, her face pale, her breath caught. What is that? At first, Henley thought it was just a shed. Old. Collapsing. Forgotten. But as they got closer, the truth became impossible to deny. This wasn't a hunting hut. It wasn't even human-made. It was a temple. Tall. Narrow. Built from ancient stone covered in ivy. Above the crooked wooden door, a circular stained glass window glowed faintly, even though there was no light inside. They moved closer. The symbol in the glass? An eye. Inside a flame. Henley stepped back. It was the same mark scorched into the midwife's ledger. The same symbol tattooed onto the back of one of the stillborn infants. This place wasn't abandoned. It was preserved. Protected. Hidden for a reason. And now, they'd found it. This is it, Henley whispered. The original chapel. He was right. This wasn't just some random ruin, it was ground zero. According to a map he'd found buried in an old parish archive, this part of the woods once held a 17th-century pilgrim outpost, predating Elmrook itself. The church? Officially destroyed in a fire. But it hadn't burned. It had been hidden. The door creaked as they pushed it open. The sound cut through the night like a scream. Inside, it was pure black. Henley flicked on his torch, and what it revealed was nightmare fuel. The air? Bone dry. Smelled like mildew, iron, and something older, like dried blood. This doesn't feel like a chapel, Mara muttered. At the front of the narrow room stood an altar. Not Christian. Not even pagan. This was something else. Something primal. The altar was carved from obsidian, covered in deep channels that had once carried blood. You could still see dried red lining the grooves. Henley scanned the room. Old pews, perfectly aligned, now rotting. Behind the altar stood a statue. It had no face. Just a hooded figure, arms stretched wide. In one hand, a sickle. In the other, a crying infant. Mara raised her hidden camera. This isn't just a church, she whispered. It's a monument. To the founders. Henley moved toward the back, something glinted beneath torn cloth. He pulled it aside. Children's shoes. A wedding ring. Tarnished jewelry. But then, beneath the relics, a ledger. Just like Mabel's. Inside, the names of women. Of children. Dates. And one line repeated over and over. Offerings successful. 1893 to 1927. They didn't speak. They couldn't. This place didn't just remember what had happened. It was still waiting. The plan was clear. Get the evidence back to London. Trigger a media firestorm. End this. But the moment they stepped into Mara's flat, something felt off. Henley had always hated the smell of fish. But now? Even the scent wafting from the shop below felt safe compared to Elmrook's silence. The sounds of buses. A train in the distance. A blinking light overhead. Normal. Comforting. False. Mara locked the door, threw her backpack down. Then froze. The windowsill plants had been moved. A photo, her and her brother, had fallen. But more than that, the kettle had been turned 90 degrees. Handle now facing the wall. Small things, Henley whispered. But not mistakes. You locked up, he asked. Of course I did, Mara snapped. Deadbolt. Chain. Everything. Henley's hand went to his coat. The ledger still inside, wrapped tight. They'd barely spoken on the train. Too shaken by the statue, by the altar, by what they'd learned about the founders. But now? Now the silence shattered. "We're not alone anymore," Mara said, voice cold. Henley swept through Mara's flat like a man chasing shadows. Bathroom? Clear. Wardrobe? Empty. Under the bed? Nothing but dust. But that was the problem. There was no sign of forced entry. And Henley knew the type of people they were dealing with. "The Historical Preservation Society doesn't need crowbars," he muttered. "They have keys. And worse. Connections. Loyalty. Influence in places most people never suspect." He pulled the ledger from his coat, unwrapped it like a relic, and placed it gently on the table. "They know we have it," he said. Inside the ledger were nearly 200 names. Dates of birth. Offerings. Infant deaths. Each entry ended with a symbol. A circle or an X. Mara leaned over, scanning the pages, voice low. "Circles, those kids survived." Henley nodded grimly. "Or weren't fully offered. The XS were final. And there were a lot of XS. That night, they didn't sleep. Instead, they turned the flat into a digital war room. White heavy checkmark photographed every page. White heavy checkmark backed up the files. White heavy checkmark encrypted them. White heavy checkmark uploaded them to 3 separate cloud drives. By 3:42 a.m., Henley glanced out the window and froze. A car. Black. No plates. Engine idling. "They're not gonna let us walk away with this," Mara said, voice steady. "We've exposed a century-old machine." "Not exposed," Henley said. "Not yet. Because history didn't fear rumors. It feared proof. And now they had it. The plan. Small orange diamond. Henley take the original ledger plus backups to MP Joanna Leeds. An independent voice, respected, and no stranger to blowing the whistle on child abuse cases. Small orange diamond. Mara leaks selected pages to a UK media outlet under an anonymous tip. "They can't stop both of us," she said. Not unless they already knew. But the next morning, everything collapsed. Mara went dark. No texts. No calls. Her backup server? Offline. Henley had no choice. Bullseye, Cambridge, UK, high noon. Henley hit the motorway. 2 hours through wide, open English countryside. Too open. Too exposed. The ledger was folded beneath a newspaper in the passenger seat. His contact. MP Joanna Leeds. A garden cafe near the Cambridge Museum. Tourists. Students. Cameras. Safety in public. That was the idea. He parked 10 minutes early. Stepped out. Scanned everything. And that's when he saw it. Across the square. A man in a long coat. Not moving. Not blinking. Same face he'd seen at the Elmrook ritual, only then, he'd been wearing a mask. Henley's pulse spiked. He looked left. A woman on a bench turned her head. Another figure, standing by the cafe's flower stall, eyes locked on him. It was a trap. This man is being hunted by a secret society, and in the next 10 minutes, he's either going to expose a century-old child ritual or vanish forever. This is not fiction. This is real. And it starts. Right now. Henley scanned every face in the park. Families laughing, couples feeding birds, but something felt off. And then. Mobile phone buzz. His burner phone lit up, unknown number. He answered. Henley. The voice was whispering, female, terrified. It's Joanna Leeds. Don't turn around. They are watching you. His entire body froze. What? You said this place was safe. Joanna didn't pause. It was. Until they traced us. 2 calls this morning, untraceable. They mentioned my daughter. Henley, they're in Parliament. They're in the Met. Henley's breath hitched. Then we go public. We leak it all. Joanna's voice cracked. No. If we do it now, they'll kill us before the files ever go live. Then what do we do? Go to Colin Ree in Scotland. Ex-police. I trust him. He'll get it out. Henley, you have to disappear. Henley turned, slowly. 2 men on a bench. Phones out, but not moving their fingers. Not scrolling. Behind them. A 3rd man leaning against a tree, reading the exact same newspaper Henley had used to wrap the ledger. The Times. July 17th edition. Too many coincidences. Then it happened. The tree man spoke. Not to anyone visible, but into a lapel mic. They are here, Henley whispered. For me. He moved fast. Bolting through the cafe, slipping past a family with a pram, weaving through parked bikes. No time to get to his car. School satchel. He ditched the satchel in a trash bin. Under his coat hem, a tiny USB drive. That was the mission now. Because this was bigger than him. The question wasn't who could he trust. It was who was even still alive to help. Hourglass with flowing sand. 2 weeks later. A brown envelope shows up at the Evening Herald. No stamp. No sender. Just, delivered. By hand. Inside. A battered USB drive. A photocopy from what looks like a 100-year-old church ledger. And a handwritten note. If this reaches you, tell the truth. Even if I'm gone. Most reporters would have tossed it. But ISA Merchant, she stopped. There was something in the handwriting. Tight. Trembling. Like it was written by someone who knew they wouldn't get a second chance. She plugged it in, on an isolated machine. No viruses. Just folders. One titled. Open File Folder Elmrook Society Evidence. Inside. Hundreds of images. Ancient ledgers. Maps. Police reports. Stone altars. Iron restraints. Children's shoes folded neatly on chapel pews. Then came the lists. Dozens of names. Ages. Disappearance dates. Next to each name. A symbol, crossmark or large heavy circle. Isa's breath caught. Some of the dates. Just months ago. Microphone narrator, slower, emotional. This wasn't a legend. It wasn't a myth. This was a network of generational abuse hidden in plain sight. And now, thanks to one man's sacrifice, the world might finally see it. But just when you think it's over. Police car's revolving light. Another envelope arrives. This one? Addressed to ISA. Inside? A photo. A man, bruised, bearded, but alive. Camera with flash timestamp, yesterday. Round pushpin location, unknown. Henley's not dead. He's out there. And the game's not over yet. This USB drive just exposed a century of cover-ups. And what's inside it is so dangerous, people are vanishing just for knowing it exists. What you're about to see is the most shocking true story we've ever told. Police car's revolving light. ISA Merchant had just stumbled on something that could take down an entire nation's elite. Judges. MPs, historians. Clergy. All connected to a secret society hiding under the innocent name. The Elmrook Historical Preservation Society. She opened a folder marked File Folder Cross-Referenced Ties, and her jaw dropped. Dozens of names. Familiar cases she remembered from her earliest reporting days. Hashtag Scales hash a retired High Court judge. Cross hash a bishop. Graduation cap a respected historian. Bust in silhouette a former prime minister. But then. Personal computer. One final folder, video testimony. She clicked. And there he was, Henley. pale, exhausted, filming from what looked like a cheap motel room. Movie camera, if you're watching this, I've either been arrested, silenced, or worse. Boom. Immediate chills. Henley didn't waste a second. He pointed to the camera, his eyes burning with truth. Fire, what you're holding is the truth about Elmrook. The rituals. The missing children. The lies buried beneath historic preservation grants. He named the Higgins family, described ritual chambers beneath churches, and even produced altered birth certificates signed by real officials. I touched the altar where they bled children for tradition. Megaphone, this is not a theory. It's real. It's been happening in the shadows for over a century. Don't let them bury this again. Isa stared at the screen, stunned. Her hands were shaking as she rushed the drive to her editor. At first, he scoffed. Another tinfoil package. Then, he watched the video. By the end, he was standing. Within 48 hours, a team of forensic experts was assembled. Documents verified. File folder missing persons cross-checked. White heavy check mark over 70 confirmed matches. This wasn't a rumor. This was a bombshell. But right when they were about to hit publish, explosion symbol legal threats rained down. Cease and desist letters. Court injunctions. Private investigators following staff. Someone was terrified. And that only meant one thing. Henley had told the truth. But where was he now? Hiding? On the run? Or just one more name ending in an crossmark? Bullseye then, the Herald made a choice. No fear. Full send. At midnight, they dropped the entire file dump. No redactions. No teasers. Just raw, unfiltered truth. Every image. Every document. Every second of Henley's testimony. All online. Free. Forever. By sunrise, the country erupted. Police cars revolving like the Elmrook files had gone viral. National TV anchors visibly shaken. Morning radio hosts stumbling over words like ritual abuse and cult lineage. Fire Reddit, Twitter, TikTok, on fire. Then came the worst part. People started recognizing names. Round Pushpin, a woman in Kent, found her sister listed, vanished in 1976. Round Pushpin, a retired nurse in Durham, said, "That symbol, they used it in my church. I thought it was a prayer group." Microphone narrator, slow, dramatic. This wasn't just ancient history. This was personal. This was buried pain coming back with names, faces, and proof. And now, one question remains. Where is Henley? And what happens next? Bomb, they tried to bury the truth, but now, it's buried them. A former government insider just confessed to destroying files, and within 2 days, the Met launched a nationwide investigation. But the man who uncovered it all vanished without a trace. This is the story of a massive cover-up unraveling, and a journalist risking everything to finish what he started. Detective ### a former Home Office clerk just dropped a bomb. Back in '94, I was told to burn every file on Ashworth and Elmrook. No questions. Just, gone. Fire within 48 hours, the Metropolitan Police released a stunning statement. Megaphone, we are opening a full inquiry into allegations surrounding the Historical Preservation Society, and possible links to a string of unreported child deaths. But it was ISA Merchant's live interview on BBC Newsnight that shook the entire country. Microphone #calm. Steady. Dead serious. This isn't folklore. This isn't superstition. This is unchecked power hiding behind stone walls and stained glass. She laid it all out. The Higgins family's rituals. The robed processions under St. Mary's. The ledger of vanished children. And the man who risked everything, Sergeant Henley. Then the country exploded. Explosion symbol, thousands of Freedom of Information requests. Open file folder, emergency investigations. Scales #Parliament inquiries. Candle #candlelit protests outside the Society's London HQ. Family parents stood in the rain, holding photos of kids lost for decades. A cardboard sign read, "We remember the ones you forgot." And then, police officer ## the arrests began. The society's acting chair, hauled in for questioning. A retired vicar in Sussex, ritual objects matching elm rooks found in his attic. A celebrity historian, once on every BBC documentary, now exposed as a key figure in the ceremonies. But even as the empire collapsed, one question haunted everyone. Face screaming in fear, "Where is Henley?" Interpol joined the search. Globe showing Europe-Africa international leads. Telephone receiver no calls. Credit card bank accounts untouched. Automobile his car, abandoned at a gas station in Derbyshire. Passport control sign no passport activity. Satellite dish no digital footprint. Just a single, hand-scrawled note found in the trunk. Memo. They can't bury what's already rotting through the floorboards. Microphone narrator, echoing. Was Henley the last to uncover the truth? Or the last to be silenced by it? Ashworth is a ghost town now. Abandoned house # the cottages, reclaimed by moss and silence. Church the church, once the stage for the unthinkable, now closed, sealed, forgotten. But beneath the cracked stone floors, the questions still bleed. Fire, they tried to erase him. But he became the spark. Next time. The reckoning. The reforms. And the terrifying question that still haunts the nation. What if Elmrook was just one of many? The church was the last to fall. Ashworth's ruins were officially demolished under structural concerns, but everyone knew that was a lie. The bell, once rung before ceremonies no one dared remember, was spared, locked away in a vault by the Diocese of Lincoln. No one spoke of it. No one wanted to be the one to hear it ring again. The Historical Preservation Society was dismantled piece by piece, its halls of influence crumbling as rapidly as the trust it had spent a century cultivating. Properties were seized. Funds frozen. Their proud legacy turned to ash, blackened by the horrors uncovered in the Elmrook files. Over 40 former members were arrested. Some for obstruction. Some for aiding in disappearances. Some for far worse. And then came the suicides. Quiet, efficient. A judge in Derbyshire. A retired bishop in Kent. A museum director in Oxford. Before they could speak, before they could be forced to, they were gone. Along with them, answers that would never surface. Despite weeks of international headlines, televised hearings, and public outrage that echoed across continents, the full truth never emerged. Some files were sealed. Others vanished. The government cited national security to justify redacting entire ledgers. Witnesses disappeared. A few retracted their statements entirely, citing stress, misremembering, or legal threats they weren't allowed to describe. Even the inquiry, 30 pages of damning conclusions, treaded carefully. Names were left out. Timelines blurred. It condemned the society, but carefully skirted the connections to elected officials, major donors, and national institutions. The result? Justice, yes. But partial. Carefully measured. Controlled. And still, the biggest mystery remained, Sergeant Thomas Henley. The man who blew it open. The man who went too deep. He was never found. Some say he was silenced, disposed of like so many before him. Others believe he escaped, went off-grid to protect the last undiscovered children. A few insist he's alive, still watching, waiting for the next piece to surface. Still guarding whatever evidence he chose not to send. Because the package that journalist ISA Merchant received, the drive, the ledger scans, the handwritten note, might not have been everything. The note had read, "If this reaches you, tell the truth. Even if I'm gone." But what if Henley wasn't gone? What if he'd simply realized, some truths are too big for one person to carry? What came next felt like the final chapter in a horror novel, except it was real. ISA delivered testimony in front of Parliament. She described the Higgins family's murder in excruciating detail. The altar beneath St. Mary's. The robed processions. The falsified birth records. The forged police logs. The children. She didn't flinch. "This isn't folklore," she said, steady voice broadcast live across the nation. "This isn't ghost stories or superstition. This is the result of unchecked power hidden behind history. Protected by silence. And we believe it has cost dozens, maybe hundreds, of lives." Her words ignited a fire across the country. By morning, thousands of Freedom of Information requests flooded government servers. Activist groups rallied. Hashtags trended globally. Outside the former headquarters of the Historical Preservation Society, a crowd of grieving families gathered, some clutching framed photos of lost children. Others holding candles. One woman held a sign that simply read, "We remember the ones you forgot." Then, the arrests began. The Society's acting chair was detained. A vicar in Sussex was discovered hoarding ritual objects in his attic, identical to those found in the Elmrook vault. A beloved BBC historian, once knighted for his contributions to heritage conservation, was named as a key organizer in the modern-day ceremonies. But no one could say how deep it really went. Every name uncovered seemed to hint at three more. Every whistleblower vanished just before they could testify. The media called it the hidden history of Britain. Interpol got involved. The United Nations opened a review. For a brief moment, the world stared directly into the abyss. And yet, Henley remained a ghost. His accounts untouched. His home abandoned. His car found at a service station in Derbyshire, keys still in the ignition, a single note stuffed in the boot. In his handwriting, 6 words. "They can't bury what's already rotting." The message chilled Isa to the bone. Because she had a theory. One she never voiced aloud. One that festered in the back of her mind. What if the drive wasn't the whole truth? What if Henley had held back the most dangerous pieces, the names too powerful, the connections too explosive? What if he had planned to disappear? To wait until someone, anyone, was ready to finish what he started? Ashworth became a scar on the map. The village, once quaint and postcard perfect, was left to decay. Moss claimed the cottages. Ivy swallowed the grave markers. The church, a place of worship turned into a ritual stage, was quietly bulldozed in the dead of night. No permits. No records. Just gone. But not everything was destroyed. The bell was saved. According to leaked church records, it now sits inside a lead-lined vault in a cathedral basement. Locked. Unmarked. No one speaks of it. No one dares ask why it was preserved. Some things, they say, are better left silent. The Historical Preservation Society no longer exists. Its properties scattered. Its secrets partially revealed. But the echo of its crimes, what they did to the Higgins family, to the missing children, to the history they rewrote, still lingers in the air. In total, 41 members were charged. Only 17 made it to trial. Others took their own lives. Some vanished before arrest. Of those convicted, most were given life sentences. A few are still appealing. But the real architects, the ones whose names Henley may have hidden, they remain untouched. The Higgins family was finally buried, in a private cemetery, away from the cameras. Only Isa and 2 distant relatives attended. The service was brief. No priests. No hymns. Just silence. And a vow from Isa to never stop pushing. Henley's fate remains unsolved. Some believe he's buried beneath Ashworth itself. Others say he escaped, South America, Eastern Europe, somewhere remote. A few, including a former MI5 analyst, believe he's still operating. Sending encrypted tips. Protecting more victims in hiding. But there are darker theories too. That Henley saw something even worse. That the rot went deeper than anyone dared admit. That what we did uncover was only a glimpse, and that the real story, the one he couldn't tell, is still waiting to be unearthed. Isa's final public statement, months later, was delivered at the National Inquiry's closing ceremony. She stood before Parliament, eyes steady, voice raw. "History doesn't sleep," she said. "It waits. Beneath the floorboards. Behind the pulpits. Inside the stories we call myths. Evil doesn't always arrive with horns and fire. Sometimes it wears robes. Sometimes it wins awards. Sometimes, it's the thing we let survive because we're too scared to look too closely." There was a long silence. Then she added one last thing. "Questioning authority, especially when it wraps itself in tradition, isn't rebellion. It's survival." No one clapped. But no one looked away either. That night, Remember Ashworth trended again. Some say it was the end. Others say it was only the beginning. Because somewhere, out there, Henley might still be waiting. Watching. Hoping that someone else will be brave enough to ring that bell. Not for ritual. Not for tradition. But to finish what he started. Because what happened in Ashworth wasn't just a crime. It was a warning. And history, when ignored, always finds a way back.